Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 14 of the Rickenbacker 620 12-string build. And in this episode, hopefully we're making a lot more progress on the fingerboard. Okay, so to move on with this fretboard, there's a number of things that we need to get done with it. Firstly, we need to reinstate these fret slots because we've lost a few little bits and pieces of them along the way of getting the radius in. And then we can start to think about getting all of these position markers in. But this is where we're going to run into some kind of order of operations issues, because if we were to shape the board and taper it down as we need it, we would then lose the ability to square lines across from the edge. So I think it's important that we at least get the reference lines that run parallel to the fret slots in place for the markers before we taper and shape the board properly. It might also be the case that we're better off just doing the position markers fully before we do any shaping. I'm not sure yet. I get the feeling that actually we just need to put those straight lines in and then we can work everything off that later on. However, the first thing we need to do before we can think about any of that is to get these fret slots finalised. And to do that, I've got my fret slotting saw set up with a guide on it, and that's set for the depth of the fret tang that I'm going to be using. But I need to get that off the bench, so I'm going to just stick this bit of waste wood into the vise and then get that on there with a bit of super glue and masking tape. And then it's just a case of running this saw back through the slot effectively until the guide stops it from cutting, and then you know you're pretty much good to go. Okay, so that's all the fret slots done again. So the next we need to start laying this out, but the first thing I'm going to do is actually trim it off at this end, because this slot here isn't a fret slot, it is actually where the nut locates, and I don't want to kind of have that little bit of waste there distracting me, because next big job is to lay out exactly where these fret markers are going to go, and that could make me make a mistake, which I don't want to do. So I'll very quickly just slice that off, and then we'll know exactly where the fretboard does and doesn't begin. Okay, so that's cut off. It's nice and square, so that's good. So the next thing is I'm going to get the drawing out, and we're just going to kind of position this next to it, and I'm going to mark exactly where it is that we're putting a marker, because hands up who's put a marker in the wrong position. I think we all do it at least once, and it is a horrible experience because there's an awful lot of work has gone into this bit of wood just to get it to this stage. So with that done, the next thing I want to do is I'm actually going to measure the gap between the fret slot and the back edge of the marker. Now, they look to be a similar size, even though the markers kind of vary in size. It's not until we get right up the fretboard that that gap gets smaller, if I'm to believe this drawing. And that actually does seem to be the case. They are 5mm right till we get to the 12th fret position, and from there on in they are 4, which isn't a huge difference, but difference nonetheless. So what I'm going to do is set up a pair of dividers to 5mm. I think that's probably the quickest route to consistency here, and then I can just put a tiny little mark in the fretboard where that goes. up to the 12th fret. And then we can take that down to 4 for the rest of them. And this is one of those occasions where we need to be quite precise. So instead of using a pencil, which has got kind of, that's probably a 1.5 mm thick, that pencil lead there, and even if I kind of sharpened it, it wouldn't be much less than that. I'm going to use a marking knife because that is quite sharp, so it's a very much finer mark that we're going to get, and I can also locate the tip of the marking knife directly into that little mark I've just made. And we can cut that in, which will give us a much more accurate position. Okay, so having got those marks in, I think this has actually helped me a little bit in deciding how I'm going to go about this, because obviously this board is much bigger than my inlays, so putting the inlays in at this point would seem a little bit out of context, but also I'm pretty sure that if I followed that line, it would actually take me beyond the next fret line, as you can see there. If I just put that rule on, I don't know if you can see actually, but the line I'd have to cut to put the inlay in actually goes into this fret position here. So that's no good, we can't do that. So we're going to have to get the board cut to shape before we can do the inlay work. Now additionally, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a bit of kind of mismatched figure in this wood, and it's where I've actually kind of gone past this coloured wood in the blank and I've kind of hit all of this ready stuff. I don't really want that in my board either, so it might be the case that we can put a centre line onto this actually on the centre of the board and then kind of trim out that red stuff, but I'm not sure that I actually will. So again, we're going to have to do a little bit of measuring. So the board is actually, it's about 75 mil. So that'd be 37.5 mil to the centre, which would be roughly there. And I want my nut to be, I'm going to go 44 mil, which I know I said I was potentially going to make it a little bit thicker at the nut, but I think actually I'm not going to. So if I do some very kind of quick marking up and then just offer a rule up, I will actually trim out the overwhelming majority of that red, and I think I'll be happy with that. So I'll just rub these marks off and then we'll get this set up with a proper centre line and mark it all out exactly how we want it and get this ready for trimming down. And then because it is often very difficult to see kind of pencil lines on dark wood at the bandsaw, I'm just going to run some of this blue fine line tape along that line, just on the inside of it actually, just to guide me a bit better. and we can just nip this over to the bandsaw and get it trimmed down. Okay, so that's the fretboard kind of dimension down now, and these markers are a little bit too big, which is actually what I intended them to be if you remember back to when we first cut them. So next up is the really fun task of getting all of these marked out and removing that waste material. And to do that, I'm going to get it back into this block in the vise, just so it's not moving about all over the place. And the way I'm going to do these is I'm going to take a chisel and I'm just going to take a little bit of this material on the inside of that knife line away. And what that will do is it will create a real positive stop for this inlay. I'll then super glue that into position, cut in the front line with my scalpel with a brand new very sharp blade in, take off the inlay, cut both the lines down with the saw. I've set the stop up at 1.5 millimeters, which is the thickness of this inlay material. And then we can take the waste out like we did last time with that tiny little router plane. Obviously, I've got a bunch of these to do, so this is going to be quite an involved job. Okay, so there's the first one in position. That's gone in really nicely. There's hardly any kind of margin around that at all. So very pleased with that. One down, 7 more to go. But this is going to take quite a long time, and I do actually want to show the process of doing this, but this episode has already dragged on quite a long time. So I'm going to leave this one here. I'll pick up again next time when we'll get the rest of these inlays in, and then perhaps have a look at getting the binding sorted out for the fretboard and get it a step closer to actually getting the frets in. So as always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.